Salesforce Space Station.
So hi everyone, I'm Ray, a Salesforce developer out in the clouds. And for today, we'll be talking about some of the best practices when you're building an Apex trigger. So for this video, let's say we have a requirement that we have to build a trigger on the contact object. So first thing, before you jump into developer console and you create the trigger, first thing you have to do is open the object in setup, and then you have to make sure that the triggers, you only have one trigger essentially. And the reason as to why we only want to have one trigger is that if we have multiple triggers, we cannot control the order of execution. So we have to make sure that we have full control, so that if we have multiple methods, multiple requirements, we're able to determine, okay, which runs first, which runs second. So in this case, we already have an existing trigger in the system. So we just have to, for every requirement, we just have to use this trigger moving forward. So let's go over the trigger, right? So as you can see here, there are trigger contexts. So we have before context and after context. And what you usually, you use before context when you're dealing with the same record. So let's say you're cleaning up the record, or you're calculating some, some field with some complex formulas, or anything that's related to the same record that you're trying to groom it. Use a before context. The downside of before context is that you do not have the record ID yet, as the record is not committed to the database. As for the after context, is usually used when you either have a real-time integration, or that you're trying to update related records to the record. And in this case, since it's already committed to the database, you would have the record ID essentially. So in this case, we're using the before context, and as you can see in the trigger, since we're using before context, we do not have DMLs, and that's essentially why before context is really great. You do not have DMLs, and so you're not, it's not going to run again your process. So if for before context, whatever you're setting on the triggered records, it will automatically, be populated when you go when the record is committed to the database, which is really good, right? Because for after context, you would have to do a DML again, and some of the processes will run again in this case. So that's for before context, and as you can see as well, during the processing time, before I do a final process from line 10 onwards, I filter the records. So that's also one of the things that you have to consider when you're building a trigger handler. Is you have to ensure that you're filtering the records correctly. Okay, and this will also avoid recursions and unwanted processing of running the logic. You have to make sure that you're only running the logic when necessary, and so you would need to have filters in place at the start. And if you see line 14 as well, it's bookified, and that's very important when you're building a trigger, because you might be thinking some of the processes what happened on the Salesforce UI, and so it's only one record at a time mostly, but you never know, right? What if the record is being created at the back end and there are multiple records being created in a single transaction? And if your triggers are bookified, it will not process everything. It will only process a single record. So you have to ensure that your logic is bookified. And lastly, I also forgot to mention, if you see here the trigger, do not have logic there. You're basically calling the handler or the helper class. Right? And that's very important to make sure that your trigger is readable. Right? You have to make sure that your trigger only has the criteria on which context it belongs, whether it's a before, and if whether it's an insert or an update, right? So that's basically the code that will be present in your trigger. So hope you like this video. I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Salesforce Space Station.